Welcome back in, everybody, to Sports and Money. I am Ben Parker. It is super late at night, but I am excited to do another recording on the Kansas City Chiefs. We're going through another position group here for Kansas City. We're just a couple of months out from the start of the season. So we're going through the position groups one by one just to get a feel for it. And I know I've said this too many times, but when we look at these position groups, when we look at this team, we are trying to get at what is really going on here and what is really the case. We're not trying to paint a happy picture. We're not trying to drink the Kool-Aid. We're not trying to tear down or destroy. Just, hey, let's see if we can get a quick, objective, if that's possible, analytical look at what we've got here. And if it doesn't look great, don't worry, because every other team in the NFL has just as many problems as you do, if not more, especially considering nobody in the NFL has a head coach and quarterback combination as good as the one you're hosting there in the great city of Kansas City. So let's get started today. We're doing the defensive line, and we're going to go through, again, I'm on ourlads.com. Show you again, website that I think many of you are familiar with. If not, go check them out. They do the depth charts for all the teams, right? And again, it's a little bit of educated guesswork. Nobody knows for sure. Some positions are easier to guess than others. Ourlads.com does a great job of trying to predict and trying to. But again, this is a still shot at a moving picture that will change almost every day in training camp and every day in the regular season, because people's always getting hurt. Somebody's getting better, somebody's getting worse. It's always changing. But anyway, that's the website that I'm working off of today. Let's start with Chris Jones. Without Chris Jones, this would be the most boring, mundane, unimpressive defensive line that there would be in football. But Chris Jones is here. And Chris Jones is now, I think, to me, the best defensive tackle in football now that Aaron Donald is gone. Chris Jones is phenomenal. Chris Jones gets the quarterback. Chris Jones gets double teams. Chris Jones is pretty good against the run. Chris Jones has a great work ethic. Chris Jones has a great attitude. Chris Jones is a great teammate. Chris Jones should be even happier now because he's got good money in the bank. He's got his guaranteed contract, so he doesn't have to worry about that. There's nothing not to like about Chris Jones. I could go on and on about Chris Jones all day. Chris Jones is the building block for this defense, has been for years. Chris Jones is the reason that Kansas City can get pressure on the quarterback without even having to do any fancy blitzing, which they do quite a bit of. Chris Jones is the guy that around whom this whole defense revolves. Okay, Chris Jones is fantastic. So Chris Jones is the starting point for this whole defense, certainly for this defensive line. He allows Kansas City to do so many different things because he's always going to get to the quarterback if you give him enough time. Or he's going to demand so many 2 or 3 player double and triple teams that you then have doors open for the players. Okay. Chris Jones, hey, listen, y'all know that. Y'all been watching him for years. Y'all know how good he is and just how phenomenal he is. So I could go on and on about him, but Chris Jones, starting point for this defensive line, he's incredible. So instead of having an average, boring, mundane defensive line, you have a very good defensive line. And that really is where it starts. After that, there's a huge talent drop off. I don't care who you're talking about. You know about Mike Dana, George Karlaftis. I don't care who you're talking about. Charles Omenihu. Massive talent drop off. What you start to get into is good, hardworking, rotational guys who are really solid, and not one of them gives you a massive advantage week to week the way Chris Jones does. Not one, not a single one. And listen, I like some of these players, okay? Most of them are cheap. That is the beauty of the rest of this defensive line. They are not weak. They are good, well-rounded players. They are not cheap. I mean, they are cheap. They're not expensive. I'm sorry. They are cheap. And they know each other. They're part of the system, and they know each other. They know how to work together. And Spagnuolo knows how to work these players together. So I was very happy when they brought these guys back together. They didn't have to. We see a lot of teams in the NFL. You've seen it, I have too, who kind of cycle these players out every year. They'll send 2 or 3 of these, kind of, normal working rotation players. They'll send them on their way. Kansas City brought them back, and Kansas City brought them back for this reason, because they had to pay Chris Jones a lot of money, had to pay Patrick Mahomes a lot of money, You're not going to be able to go out in the fourth round of the draft and find the difference-making edge rusher more than likely. That's extremely unlikely. Kansas City has tried. Well, that's unlikely. You're not going to be able to go out in free agency and pay a guy who's actually going to make a huge difference on the edge. Kansas City has tried. All right. Kansas City has tried to develop these edge rushers, tried to buy these edge rushers, tried to trade for these edge rushers, tried to pull somebody in who's actually going to make a huge difference. It has not worked over the years. In fact, it has hurt them sometimes. All right. I won't go into it tonight. It has hurt them sometimes in their quest to find players besides Chris Jones who can be significant difference makers. So what they have done now, as the Mahomes contract grows larger, and as the Chris Jones contract has gotten larger and eaten up bigger percentages of cap, the POC, what they have done then is decided, hey, let's at least pay veterans who are solid and who have been in our system. Let's keep them here, and we will at least have the cohesion and the communication and the fit together and the work together. And Kansas City has done a great job of collecting these players and keeping them here instead of sending them packing on their way while bringing in a fourth round pick or a fifth round pick or a mid-level free agent who's going to cost them more than they can really afford and not get a whole lot done anyway. All right. We've seen them do it all. They've tried it all, bless their hearts, and they're doing the best they can here. But anyway, smart decisions here to bring these guys back. So here they are. George Karlaftis, who probably has the most upside, right? I'm sure everybody is hoping that Karlaftis can actually take another step forward. Now, listen, he's been fine, and I know the sack numbers are there. So if you're going to hit me up with the sack numbers, please tell me you have more than just a statistic, because he's been okay. He's been fine. He's been a good part of the rotation. He's been a solid starting defensive end, and he has gotten some sacks, but he is not yet a true difference maker. He just isn't. But I really like him. He's very cheap. Glad they drafted him, and he gives them a chance, and he's still got some hope for this team that he could actually take another step and become even better than he is. All right. So like George Karlaftis, that's the next guy. So he's there on one defensive end. On the other defensive end spot, you're probably looking at Mike Danna. Mike Danna, again, is never going to dominate. He just isn't. This is a guy who's gotten a little bit better, marginally better each year that you've had him. And he's kind of worked. You don't usually see guys do this either, but Mike Danna has kind of worked his way up the depth chart. All right. You've seen him, I don't know, first season, 200 snaps, second season, a little bit more, third season, a little bit more. And he's just kind of worked his way into, hey, this guy is a good, productive player. So Mike Danna going to be holding down the other defensive end spot to some degree. Derek Nottie, defensive tackle. Derek Nottie is basically your run-stopping defensive tackle. He's not dominant. There was a point in time early on in his career where we thought, hey, Nottie might step up and just be that uber dominant run-stopping defensive tackle who would perfectly complement Chris Jones with the pass rushing ability, and that really hasn't panned out. But Derek Nottie still is an above-average defensive run stopper, and that's his niche. That is what gets him on the field. So you have Nottie there at another defensive tackle spot. After that, you've got more depth, and listen, Felix Anudike-Uzomah, you're hoping he can take that next step. You're hoping he can maybe start to show the ability to get the quarterback some. Still like him. He deserves to be on the field. This is a good player who deserves to be on the field. But again, just a rotation guy. Mike Pennel. Pennell's been around a long time. Pennell's a good, solid defensive tackle who, again, is not going to dominate. But this is depth. I was talking about the offensive line on my other video, and I questioned what downright said and opined that they have no depth on the offensive line. They have depth out the wazoo here on the defensive line. Okay, you got Mike Pennel. You've got Tershawn Wharton right here. We have seen that he can be effective at stretches, not maybe as good as his 2022 tape showed that we thought he might could be, but still the guy that can get in the mix. Charles Omenihu is a very effective, good rotational edge rusher. So you've got several guys here between Karlaftis and Danna and Uzomah and Omenihu. You've got four guys right there who have some ability to get to the quarterback. Now, again, most weeks, offensive lines aren't quaking in the wake of these guys and trying to just figure out how are we going to stop this rabid group. That's just not the case, right? But when you mix Chris Jones being dominant, purely dominant at his defensive tackle spot. And then you mix Steve Spagnuolo's ability to bring blitzes from different times and be creative and be unpredictable and bring the blitzes from different places. And then you add in the fact that Kansas City has collected several of these good, solid defensive ends who, at the right moments and times within the system, whether it's coming in off a twist or a stunt, or whether it's just working off the free space they're being given because Chris Jones is getting so much attention, whatever, you've got these collection of guys who can get some pressure on the quarterback, all right? And that reminds me of what the Patriots used to do. It's not quite as strong as what the Patriots used to do, but it reminds me of that, in that you had this collection of guys who were going to get to the quarterback through system or through their own solid ability. And that's what the Kansas City has here. And they're very deep here. So if one guy gets injured, one guy goes down, as long as it's not Chris Jones, next guy steps up. And this is where, listen, we hear next man up the entire season, right? Every year from every team, we hear next man up. And most of the time, it doesn't mean jack squat, all right? It doesn't mean anything. It's just players talking and coaches talking, and it doesn't mean anything. On this defensive line for Kansas City, next man up means something, because when you're looking, listen, this is a pretty good, solid starting four, if that's the starting four, and it may not be, but if that's the starting four, that's a pretty good starting four because of Chris Jones. But even after that, these next four guys coming in here, right here, okay? Felix Anudike-Uzomah, good rotational guy. Charles Omenihu, good rotational guy. Tershawn Wharton, you can move him all over the place. Good rotational guy. Mike Pennell, good, solid defensive tackle. This right here would still be better than some defensive lines in the NFL, some of the worst ones, this second group right here. So you have 8 guys right here for Kansas City that deserve to be on the field. They deserve to have 250 snaps. They deserve to have 350 snaps, okay? And so you have the depth, and you're not going to get tired. And Kansas City, I can't compliment them enough here on this. Listen, there aren't difference makers, but I can't say enough about them for collecting these guys who are cheap, who are experienced, who are solid against the run, against the pass. There's several of them. It keeps you fresh. And because they're familiar with each other, you have that little extra bonus, if you will. And listen, we hear people talk all the time about, hey, we're together, we're a great group, we're experienced. That don't mean anything without Chris Jones, okay? That means nothing without Chris Jones. But when Chris Jones is there, now you've got these other guys who have communicated, they have played together, they do have experience together in the system, and that gives you that little bit of a bonus right there. So I can't say enough about Kansas City doing this the smart way and allowing that, putting that together. So you get in the third line here. It's not a lot to write home about here on the third line, but who cares? You know, B.J. Thompson, Matt Dickerson, Neil Farrell, Malik Carey. I really don't think you're going to see much out of these guys this year. The one other name I do have some hope for, and I mentioned this just after the draft with the UDFAs, is Fabian Lovett, senior out of Florida State. Listen, there was another kid that came through from Florida State 2 seasons ago, and I said, hey, you know, he's got some high upside, but he also may just completely whiff and miss because he's a real raw guy. Fabian Lovett is not raw, okay? I really do. I expect Fabian Lovett at some point to get on the field. Maybe not this year. It might be 2025. Fabian Lovett's got some good tape at Florida State against good teams. And while he's probably not as dominant as we all hoped he might be, say, a year ago, maybe he's not as fast as we all hoped he might be, still, this is a guy who played at a major school and had some pretty major tape for a couple of seasons. And I don't expect Fabian Lovett to flame out. I expect him to do something similar to what these other guys have done. And then just kind of work his way up the roster. We'll see. I could be wrong about that. You know, these guys come and go. But Fabian Lovett, I expect him to stick, and I expect him to be up here on this third team anyway. And I expect him, if not this year, the next year, to kind of work his way up the roster here. I really do kind of think you're going to see that happening here because he just seems to fit what all these other guys are doing. All right, that's the defensive line. Let me know in the comments what you're most excited about, what you're worried about here, or if you just think, hey, this is the best defensive line ever. End of story, Ben. Shut up, right? So let me know. Thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it. We'll do some more of this as the summer goes on, and we'll keep working on all of this. So thank you all very much. I'm looking for the stop record button, and we'll see you next time. Have a great one. Bye.